All right, welcome back to another episode of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large at Mississippi Today. And by the way, if you haven't checked out Mississippi Today, go there. We got great news coverage and also great things like Mississippi Stories. And of course, you can see my cartoons as well. Several newsletters you can sign up for too. So that's my little plug for Mississippi today. And I hope you're having a great day today. And I think we're about to have a fantastic interview. I'm very excited. Authors with us, Susan Cushman. I got that correct, of course, because I'm pretty smart like that some days. She's the author of the brand new book, John and Mary Margaret. It's a great read. I recommend it. And also, too, she's written several other books, Friends of the Library, Cherry Bomb, Tangles and Plaques, A Mother and Daughter Face Alzheimer's. And I definitely want to unpack that one with you just for a minute, just because I had a very similar experience with my dad. So that touched me. She also is an editor as well. And she's very good about quoting Eudora Welty, and I love this quote right here. All serious daring starts from within. At some point in your life, you decided you were going to become a serious writer, and I think you've made up for lost time. You've been very prolific in a very short amount of time, written a lot of great things, and I can't wait to unpack that with you as well. Susan, man, welcome. It's so nice to meet you.
Thanks, Marshall. I've been following you, and it's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's following me. Should I be nervous? I mean, it's so funny. In this age of social media, it's so different now.
Yeah, I'm not stalking. Following versus stalking,
Oh, that's true. I guess, yeah. Words matter, I guess. And look,
right.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And I actually, believe it or not, I found out about the book from my boss, who happens to be named Mary Margaret. So now I understand why she wanted to, thought this would be a great interview, I guess. But I'm so glad that you get on my radar, because I really have enjoyed your writing. And I think you write like I try to draw. I mean, I have a sense that you picture things in your head and you just sit down and you try to describe them the best you can while you're picturing these things.
Cool. Yeah, I'm also an artist, so that's probably why I do that a bit. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you do that, because like for me, I'll picture a scene, like it'll just come to me. Like say I'll picture a hangar in the Delta with an old airplane sitting there, and suddenly it becomes a story about a son repairing the airplane to help heal his father. That sort of thing. It's not very linear, but I picture it and then I just sit there and try to write the words. Is that kind of how you work when you write?
Absolutely. With my first novel, Cherry Bomb, because she was a graffiti artist, I used a storyboard.
Yeah.
And, Elaine de Kooning, the famous abstract expressionist artist, is in that book. So I had Elaine de Kooning's abstract expressionist art. I had graffiti. I had iconography, because that's featured in there. And I had all these index cards and storyboard images. And I would move them around in my mind and move them around there while I wrote. Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I was talking with Greg Iles the other day about that. And I love talking with other authors and artists and musicians about the creative process, because it's like we all don't do it the same way, right. But it's just so fascinating to hear how people do actually do it. When you write, do you write like first thing in the morning? Do you get up when it's quiet and do that? Or is it just kind of like when the muse hits you?
I don't really have a schedule, because my husband and I, our kids are grown. We've got grandkids, so we have the house to ourselves, and his office is upstairs and mine's downstairs, because he's been working from home during COVID, and that's about to change. So I don't really have a schedule. I can have a quiet time any time of day. It doesn't have to be first. I'm not really a morning person. I probably don't get to my desk before 9 o'clock. Lots of mornings, 8 or 9. But when I'm in a writing mode, when I'm working on a project, I will work several hours a day, but it can be different times of the day. But then I'm mixing that in with a lot of social media. I love social media because writing is lonely.
Yeah.
It's a way to connect. And then I'll mix that in with marketing and my blog and reading and exercise. So I'm fortunate that I can really set my day each day the way I want to.
You mentioned your blog, and that was how really that's how Tangles and Plaques came about. And I was thinking about that because I ended up writing a book that was basically just a bunch of short stories that I'd written on my blog.
Right.
And that's a much easier way to do something, because you're not having to worry about writing 30,000 words or whatever. You're just getting up in the morning, you're writing a little bit, but yours was very personal because it was about your mom's journey with Alzheimer's and of course your journey as a daughter and as a caregiver, but you're not a caregiver because you're not there with her.
Right.
And I had the same exact experience with my father, who had Alzheimer's, who was in Atlanta, and I was here in Jackson. So I burned up I-20, you burned up I-55. So
Yeah.
yeah, and it's fascinating. And I was just talking to my sisters here for my son's graduation, and I was like, I'm really interested because I want to read it, but I don't know if I want to read it because I don't know if I want to relive it a little bit. How hard was that to sit down and write about things that really, honestly, I mean, I can tell you, it hurts so badly to watch a loved one slowly slip away from you like that.
It does, but when that was going on, during the 8 years that mom was in a nursing home, see, prior to that, she was in assisted living for 3 years. And my father died young. So I know for me, it was cathartic to come home from each visit there and write a blog post. And as I did that over the years, one of my readers actually said, "Why don't you turn these into a book?"
Yeah,
So that's the second time I've had a reader say, "Hey, why don't you do this?" And so the hard part was living through it.
yeah,
Writing the blog post was cathartic. And then when it came down time to do the book, the work was done. I took 60 blog posts from an 80-year period and did very little editing because I wanted them to retain that immediacy that a
yeah.
blog post has. Found a small press and boom, it was done. Tangles and Plaques, a mother and daughter face Alzheimer's. So it's gotten a big readership. And for those who are interested, there's a group of 200 authors who write about caregiving for Alzheimer's, and it's called alzauthors.com, alzauthors.com. You can go on there and find memoir, essays, fiction, everything about caregiving for Alzheimer's. It's a great resource.
Yeah, let me ask you that just when we're done interviewing with the interview, would you email me that link and I'll make sure I
Sure.
put it in the link on this video so that people
Sure, glad to. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think you're right. I think you just and I probably answered the question when I was asking you about that. But a few years ago, I had cancer, a melanoma, and I mean, I'm fine. I'm still here, obviously, but I didn't tell anybody about it for a year. And then one day I wrote a column about it, and it did feel better to write about it. But what really felt great was when people started saying, "Well, I went and got checked because of it." And what's so valuable about what you've done with that book and is that there are a lot of people that are walking along the same journey that you walked along, and they're reading that and they suddenly don't feel like they're alone. And that's really
Right.
powerful.
Yeah, that's part of why I did it. Exactly right there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
huge.
was so blessed. Mom was down there in Jackson, where you are, at Lakeland Nursing Home,
Mhm.
and they were wonderful. They
Yeah.
would call me about the least little thing, and it was a good place for her to be.
Yeah, I always say this with Dad, and obviously we've got a lot of ground to cover today, so don't worry. But I'll just say one thing about Dad is he never really lost his sense of humor, which was kind of who he was, and it was funny and not funny. I mean, you learned how to pivot. Like he would ask you things, and you would never correct. You just kind of went with him,
Right.
whenever on that. But one day, the last time I saw him when he was conscious, he was off by himself, and he wasn't feeling well. He had some kidney issues, and he looked sad, and I was like, "Dad, what's wrong?" And he recognized me, and he looked at me and he said, "I have to pay your tuition, don't I?" And I smiled and I said, "Dad, I just came to give you the best news ever." I said, "I got a scholarship and you never have to pay my tuition again." And he got the biggest grin on his face, and it was just, so it's like,
You
well,
just
Dad,
you enter their world where they are.
you
That's
do.
what
You
you do.
definitely do. So anyway, so I will. I'll have to check out Tangles and Plaques. We'll go ahead and jump ahead to John and Mary Margaret. Very, very powerful book, and I love the way you structured it. And obviously Adele is an author that lives nearby, that they meet at a book club meeting, who sounds suspiciously like somebody I've just met and feel like I know fairly well, who wrote a book about her mom's experience with Alzheimer's too. It's like, Mark Twain was right. You do write about what you know.
You do.
But I really like the way that you use her and another very famous author, Eudora Welty, to be able to move things along and to open up worlds. And that was a pretty interesting way to structure it.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun doing that. And of course, the story, as you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned this or not yet,
Yeah.
was part of my short story collection, Friends of the Library. It was
Yeah.
10 stories in there. So basically, I took that short story and fleshed it out, which was suggested by a reader, and fleshed it out to be a full story.
Well, I
So I
hope you
already
gave that
had,
reader a really nice signed copy.
say again?
I said, I hope you gave that reader a really nice signed
Oh,
copy.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was great. And she's also a writer.
Oh,
Uh,
excellent.
yeah, so that was a great idea. So the the backbone was done.
Yeah.
So writing this book was really fun because I knew what was going to happen next. It was just fleshing out each part of it, you know. So it wrote itself during the pandemic. It was about a year ago when I wrote it in about 3 months. And,
Wow.
and it kind of wrote itself. You know, I put a quote by Eudora Welty in my author's note in the book. It says, "Every writer, like everybody else, thinks he's living through the crisis of the ages. To write honestly and with all our powers is the least we can do and the most." And then I said, you know, I wrote this during the pandemic and I thought I was living through the crisis of the ages. And for me, perhaps I was, perhaps, you know, we all are. Because in addition to COVID going on, there was all of the nationwide protests, the racial injustice was happening at the same time. And I thought, I've got to write about this. I'm 70 years old. I'm not going to go out there in person and join the protest. I almost did because here in Memphis, they were nonviolent. They did a great job. But with COVID and my age, I just didn't think I should. And I wanted to do something. And my husband said, well, write about it. That's your voice. So that's how John and Mary Margaret came about.
Mary Margaret and you had a very similar upbringing. That there was a lot of things you have in common, and then there's a point where you veer off. You know, she veers off as a character.
Exactly.
But tell us a little bit of what it was like for you to grow up in Jackson during the 60s, during the same time she's growing up, and were your parents like her parents and so forth on that?
Yeah, you know, it's become cliche to talk about that privileged white bubble, but that's what it was. I was unfortunately pretty unaware of a lot of things that were going on, or they weren't touching my little bubble life. They just weren't, you know. And my parents were not, they were conservative, but not as conservative as Mary Margaret's. You know, they would have read a New Yorker article, you know, where Eudora Welty's story was. And my mother wasn't, you know, Mary Margaret's mother was all about getting her into Tri-Delt sorority at Ole Miss and getting her married to the right guy and the country club set and all of that. And my mother was not junior league. She was just maybe a step below that country club set. And my parents were not quite as conservative as that. So, you know, I had Mary Margaret pledge my sorority, Tri-Delt at Ole Miss. And but the background, the funnest thing I had doing was having her living in the Belhaven neighborhood.
Yeah.
And meeting Eudora Welty. Well, I lived in the Belhaven neighborhood.
I was going to ask if you lived nearby.
Yeah, as a newlywed. And yeah, right after I left Ole Miss, I lived in the Belhaven neighborhood for 5 or 6 years. I knew where Eudora Welty's house was. I was at Belhaven College one year. I went to school there one year. So her house was right across the street. And I never got up the nerve to go knock on the door. You know, I had heard that in the summer, kids would knock on her door and she would give out popsicles.
Oh, wow.
And they called her the popsicle lady. And so I thought, I got to have Mary Margaret meet her. And the Pigwig, the Piggly Wiggly grocery store right nearby, I set it up so that they would meet there. And Mary Margaret would go home with Eudora Welty, who greatly influenced her, educated her about what was going on with racial issues and really changed the path that she was on. That was probably my favorite thing to write about.
I love that. And I love the interaction. Like she was still alive when I moved here. And you might see her at the Piggly Wiggly became the Jitney Jungle.
Oh, that's what I meant. Jitney Jungle.
Yeah.
It was a Jitney Jungle. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but I mean, it was like, you might run into her there when you're, when you're shopping and so forth. And I was like, this is so cool that I live in a place where you can actually run into Eudora Welty, who I had, read in high school. And it's like, that was really neat, but it was. And I loved, Mary Margaret's eyes were opened up, and then she would go back to her parents, and her parents were kind of like, please close your eyes. It was fun to watch her growth as a character on that. And I just loved just thinking about Eudora Welty as something other than just a literary icon, just as a regular person, doing that. And I was thinking about, you're right, that it would have been a totally different story once she got to Ole Miss, because she probably would have been still as oblivious to everything that was going on.
Yeah, she might have been, though I did introduce later the story about her and her maid.
Yeah.
And because we had a maid from the time I was, I don't know, a little bitty until I was a teenager. My mother was a school teacher, and so, and I had a great respect for her, and
Mhm.
I was always a little bit miffed by the fact that she would call me and my brother Miss Susan and Mr. Mike, and my parents would call her, we would call her Lily Bell by her first name, you know.
Yeah.
And I sensed that something was off with all of that. So I decided to have Mary Margaret's maid be a character in the book too, and kind of Mary Margaret learned some more there through that experience.
I love the character of John in the book for many
Thank
different
you.
reasons. And I love it. In the beginning of his chapter, you had a quote from Richard Wright, said, the world of most men is given to them by their culture. And,
Yes,
and you were watching him not only being shaped by the world he was living in and forced to endure, but also too, there was this, it was almost like watching, say, a dandelion break through the concrete with him, because he wanted, even though the world was pressing down on him, there was so much there. He wanted to be a lawyer. He wanted to read. He loved books. He loved the written word. And but then he was having to deal with, somebody slamming a door, and a white guy slamming a door in his face, and not, but there was one point where one of his friends told him, you can't teach them anything with violence.
yes.
And I found this to be in the book, that the one saving golden thread that runs through the book is love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad you caught that.
Yeah. Which, my wife would be impressed that, she thinks I miss on these things. But I mean, I did. And I think that's what the book is truly, it is that dandelion pushing through that because of love.
Yes,
Do that.
yes, yes. So I'm talking about John, the character.
Yeah.
He was inspired by two of the Ole Miss Eight,
Yeah.
the ones that were arrested, Don Cole, and I didn't remember the other one's name earlier, Kenneth Mayfield.
Okay.
They
Yeah.
were both there. So he was inspired by them. So unlike writing Mary Margaret, for writing her, I did not have to do a lot of research because so much came from my own life.
You were
But
there
writing
when
the
that
Ken-
happened.
Say again, what?
Weren't you at Ole Miss when that happened?
I was.
Yeah.
But with John's life, of course, he was a Black boy growing up in Memphis. And so
Right.
I had to do a lot of research. And since I've been living in Memphis since '88, I have a lot of friends who are from Memphis,
Mhm.
who were early readers who helped me, a couple of lawyers, and people who would guide me with, how to make sure, even though it's fiction,
Yeah.
everything in it, I wanted it to be as close to what could be true,
Yeah.
and all of that. So it was fascinating learning a lot as I wrote about John's character. And yeah, and the Ole Miss Eight. Well, I was there. So do you want to talk about the concert?
Yeah, sure.
So in one of the scenes in the book, there was a concert. There was a group called Up With People that came to Ole Miss in 1970. And the concert happened 2 different nights, evidently, because I've been talking with my husband who was there and 3 or 4 other people who were there who don't remember anything about the protest. 60 students were arrested.
Yeah.
Tons of highway patrol and cars were there. Lights were everywhere. They were taken to jail. And I was just really frustrated thinking, how could I have been there and been not seen that happened? So finally, after talking with a number of people, I discovered that the concert lasted 2 nights. We went on the night that the protest didn't happen.
Oh.
Because I knew we had gone. I knew I had heard that group. And so we were there another night. And so, of the Ole Miss Eight who were arrested, and some of them were suspended, and one in particular was not allowed to get her diploma, even though she had finished all of her work she needed for graduation. And so I have a fictional character that's based on her.
Mhm.
And so what wonderful thing happened in February of 2020, there was a 50-year reunion for the Ole Miss 8 on the Ole Miss campus. And one of the organizers, Ralph Eubanks, who teaches at Ole
Yeah.
Miss, who was there when it all happened, and read my book and gave me a lot of good feedback. He helped organize that event. So I decided to have that event be in the epilogue of my book to reflect back 50 years later, which was really fun. That was something I did after the rest of the book was written. I thought, oh, wow, look at this. This 50-year reunion happened. That's got to be in there. So that was really fun, tying the fictional with the historic in that way.
You know, of course, John being with Don Cole, and of course, Don's story, you know, here he got kicked out of the university, and yet he came back to end up being a very influential leader at the university for many, many years. And I mean, I had the honor of being able to be in a discussion group with him a few weeks ago and just getting to sit there and listen to him tell the stories. And that's what made me, I really, once again, because there is so much truth in this fiction, that just made me enjoy the book that much more.
Thank you. I was so impressed with him. That took a lot of courage and commitment for him to come back to school there. You know, that's amazing that he did. And then that he made such a big difference. Yeah, I would love to meet him in person.
Yeah, because I mean, it would be very easy, and I wouldn't blame him to be totally bitter, you know, I mean, to go through something like that. And you just, you know, you could allow that to ruin your life, and it didn't. And once again, you know, love wins out on that. And I think it's really cool that you know Ralph also.
Yeah, great
Ralph's
guy.
a great guy. He really is.
Yeah. Ralph is going to be in conversation with me July 1st for an event hosted by Lemuria Books there in Jackson.
Oh, wonderful.
Talking about John and Mary Margaret. So it'll be virtual July 1st. I forgot what time, but
Okay.
Lemuria is on their website. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that I will be following you on Twitter and everything else, I'll make sure that I promote that out too, because I think the world of Ralph, and you know, like I said, I've known you for 25 minutes, and so far, so good. You know, so I think that worked great. A little bit on the, you know, I might say I'll just go ahead and allow you to kind of give the rest of the story that you want to, because I don't want to spoil too much of the plot for people, because I feel like it is such a wonderful journey, and it's a hard journey. I mean, there's some tough things they go through in the book, but tell us a little bit more.
Well, like everything I write, my first novel, Cherry Bomb, my short story collection, Friends of the Library, and this, they all have a lot of autobiographical things that feed it. And one in particular that feeds this is that both John and Mary Margaret have spouses who have Alzheimer's and Lewy body disorder, which is a similar thing to Alzheimer's. I lost a close friend to Lewy body 2 years ago, and she was just 65. So, you know, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, because it's obvious that when John and Mary Margaret fall in love on the Ole Miss campus in 1966, it is verboten.
Right.
It does not work out, you know. But what does work out is how they meet 50 years later, because each of their spouses are in the same nursing home in Memphis with Alzheimer's and Lewy body. So it was important to me to bring those elements back into the book as well. And then, of course, you know, their romance reignites, and they end up back in Oxford. And I won't tell the whole end of that, but I loved having them end up back there. You know, when I first wrote the book, I had them start out at a book club in Olive Branch, Mississippi, in North Mississippi. And a friend of mine that read the book said, why don't you set it in Harbor Town instead, right where you live in Memphis, on the Mississippi River, my neighborhood right here. And I thought, wow, yeah, why not do that? So I moved the setting for that part of it to Harbor Town. And you know, there's several book clubs here in my neighborhood. So, you know, when I have them eventually go into a book club together, and repeating Adele, the fictional author. So what happened with that was my first book, Cherry Bomb, was published by Joe Lee, who's a publisher there in Brandon. Excuse me. And he asked me to go on a little book tour to libraries in small towns in Mississippi for Cherry Bomb. And I thought, well, okay, if you really want me to, you know, I'd rather just be at the bookstores and the book festivals and the conferences and all of that. But if you want me to drive to Eupora and West Point and all of these little places, I'll Pontotoc, I'll do it. And I absolutely loved it. Before I went to each town, even though I'm from Mississippi, I'd never been to most of those smaller towns. I'm from Jackson, and I would I'd research about the town. And then when I would get driving to town, I would look for that famous antebellum home that's now a museum, or that blues place, or, the historic places. I would go and look for them while I was in town. And then I would meet people who came to the Friends of the Library meeting where I was speaking about my book. And I would go back home, and my natural inclination was to write a blog post about each visit, because that's what I do, which is sort of a marketing thing and sort of just a fun thing. But all of a sudden, I had the idea, what if? And what if are the best two words for a fiction writer to ever ask themselves. What if, instead of writing blog posts, what if I make up a short story about each visit? And I create this fictional author named Adele, who's me, and I have her embrace someone in each place who has a serious issue going on in their life. And the 10 short stories, they faced issues, most of which were part of my life. Everything from cancer to Alzheimer's to childhood sexual abuse to adoption, homelessness. All these issues have in one way or another touched my life. And so that was my first time to write short stories. And of course, one of those was John and Margaret. And even though it wasn't set initially in Oxford, their backstory was set in Oxford. It was set in Senatobia at the library there initially. So, using all those issues from my own life I don't know if I'm ever going to run out of that. And I'm eventually going to write something that isn't fed by those issues. But I don't know. I'm 70 and I've lived a lot. I've done a lot. So I probably still have more of that to explore. But between times
tell us a little bit more about yourself, because you live a pretty interesting life. And when did you decide to just dive headfirst into becoming a writer full time?
Yeah, well, when my kids were at home, we have 3 adopted kids who are now 39, 40, 43, around in there. But when they were at home, my husband was super busy. He's in academic medicine, and he traveled a lot. And so I felt like I needed and wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, soccer mom, the whole bit. And a lot of my children's friends' moms were career people, so our house was where a lot of times the kids would come after school, and I'd be driving to soccer and doing all of that. All the time I was thinking, I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer, but I'm putting that off. So in 2001, when my third child left for college, I said, okay, now I'm going to do me. Well, I got cancer.
Oh no.
And but I'm fine now. I'm 20 years fine this year, thank God.
2001? You
What?
said you got cancer in 2001?
Yes.
Same year I did. Congratulations. Yeah.
Wow, 20 years for both of us. Thank
Yeah.
God. Yeah. My surgery cured me.
Yeah.
And then the same year was when our son joined the army and went to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
Those things disrupted me a little bit, but they also fed my desire to want to write. But I started with art. And I'm a convert to Orthodox Christianity, like the Greek Orthodox Church. So I studied iconography first, and I painted icons. And I went to icon workshops, and I went to pilgrimages at monasteries in this country and other countries. So for a number of years there, I focused on the art. In the back of my head the whole time was, I really want to write. I really want to write. And I started out with freelance writing, magazines, journals, essays. I still love the essay as a genre. It's still one of my favorite genres. So I did a number of that for a number of years. And then finally I decided it's time to try to do a book. So I wrote a memoir, and there was too much in it that I didn't want to go public with. It was more cathartic to write it. It included some sexual abuse and things that happened in my life that I needed to write. But I didn't want to publish the memoir. So instead, I let a whole lot of that feed my first novel, Cherry Bomb, which took about 6 years. It was a long project to write, publish. I worked with a New York literary agent for a while, and I did not like what she was doing to the book. Her editors were trying to make it hardcore commercial fiction, like Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. And I was wanting to keep its Southern literary and spiritual elements to it, which evidently weren't going to sell. So we parted ways. I went with a small press, didn't make a whole lot of money, but I'm super proud of the book.
Yeah.
because he got the book. He got what I was trying to do. And editorially, it was great. And so that came out to be a novel that embraced a lot of my personal issues without writing it as a memoir. So I thought, I'm gonna stick with fiction probably, but I have ADD. So if I don't have a project going on, I get bored real quick.
Yeah.
So while you're waiting for like right, as you know, being a writer is kind of like being in the army. It's the hurry up, wait, hurry up, wait. You've got to meet their deadline, and then you got to wait forever until they want the next thing done, in the process. So while I was waiting on Tangles and Plaques to be published and Cherry Bomb to be edited, I decided to put together an anthology of essays by women writers. And that's how A Second Blooming, Becoming the Women We're Meant to Be, that's how that came out. And it has essays by 20 women authors, many of whom had been influential in my life, people like Cassandra King, Pat Conroy's wife, and others. I was able to procure a prelude, a forward from Anne Lamott, and Mercer University Press jumped on it and published it. So it was so much fun editing an anthology. I like to organize and pull things together, but I thought it's so much easier than writing a novel. I thought I'm just going to keep doing this. So I did it again in 2018 with Southern Writers on Writing. And that time I got 13 men and 13 women. Was only able to find 4 or 5 Black authors. I just, believe it or not, I just didn't know enough personally who would respond to my requests because I wanted there to be diversity. So University Press of Mississippi published that in 2018, Southern Writers on Writing. And again, the editing and the pulling it together and the organizing it was just fun. So I'm pretty sure I'll do another one of those someday. But I do have another novel starting to turn in my head. I've done 1 chapter, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna follow it yet. I have to be in love with the idea on the front end if I'm gonna follow through with it. No.
So as you're starting this novel, let me ask you, do you do the J.K. Rowling method of outlining everything from the beginning to the end and so forth, or do you sit down and start writing and go on a journey with your characters?
That's a great question, and I have answered both. I've done it both ways.
Yeah.
With Cherry Bomb, I outlined the entire book. I outlined every chapter. I had to know what was going to happen. And I had friends who would say things like, oh, I never know what's going to happen. I start with a character. It just takes on a life of its own. And I've always thought that was a little Twilight Zone-y, even though William Faulkner says that's how he writes.
Yeah.
He'll start with a character and they'll take off on the page and he just tries to keep up with them, So when I got to John and Mary Margaret, actually when I got to the short story collection, Friends of the Library, that started to happen for me. That was the first time that had ever happened. I started with a setting with each town. I started with a character, a homeless man in one, a young librarian who was searching for his birth mother in one, a young girl suffering from cancer at St. Jude's Hospital, and there's a weeping icon and healing involved. So each one had a character and a setting and an idea, and I just wrote. And it's the most fun I've ever had writing. And those stories I felt like just kind of wrote themselves. So when I wrote John and Mary Margaret, the story was already there. Right. So it was just expanding. It was a different kind of thing. In my next novel, I'm probably not going to outline. I'm going to probably try this again see if it'll work, because I have the characters in mind. I have the setting in mind. I have the general idea of what's going to happen in mind. I think I'm just going to keep going and see what happens. I'm going to try that route again. What about you? Do you outline?
I do not. And I was just thinking, because I've only written short stories, so I've never written anything any longer than that. But I think that was what made the short stories really good, was because it was one of those things that, like I said, I would picture something and then I would run with it. And then it naturally felt like I was ready to come to a conclusion and I would tie it up. And it, 1,500, 2,000 words, boom, you could tell it pretty quick and, tell the story, but it was always just magic like that. And the ideas came to me the same way like an editorial cartoon would come to me. It'd be like a flash, the picture, and then I would just describe the picture. But I've always wondered what it would be like to write a novel, and I think it's fascinating to hear that you've done it one way and you're going to try the other. Now, I will ask, and I don't know how much you're willing to, let us know. Do you know? Can you give us a little hint about what the next novel might be about?
Yeah, though I may completely change my mind and reject it, keep
Yeah.
that in mind. And Stephen King says you should never tell, but I don't mind. I'm probably going to set it. My favorite place ever anywhere is Seagrove Beach, Florida,
Yeah.
and we go there for vacation. My daughter was married on the beach there, and I spent 3 month long writing retreats there back in 2010, 11, 12, or just by myself for a month at the beach writing. So I'm in love with the area. It's right next door to Seaside.
Yes.
Of course, Seaside is just this enchanting little beach town, just enchanting. So I'm thinking of setting it in Seaside,
Oh, nice.
and I'm thinking that um, there will be a group of women who have a bridge club. I grew up watching my parents play bridge, and I learned to play when I was young. And when the bridge clubs would meet at my house, my mother would let me watch if I wouldn't talk,
Yeah.
and there's also going to be Alzheimer's
Oh,
involved. So Seaside Beach, a bridge club, and Alzheimer's. So that's all I'm going to say right now. And I think I'm going to run with that, but I'm not sure yet. We'll see. I have to love it.
I think I think it's going to work. I really do. No, because number one, it's so beautiful there. My parents took us down there for their doing the math here, 50, 50th anniversary. Yeah, Dad passed away on his 60th. But we went down to there, and you're right. That area is just enchanting and gorgeous,
It
and
is.
the white sand, the beautiful water. Yeah, I think that's going to work.
Great.
Uh,
And the little community there is great.
yeah,
We have a great bookstore, Sundog Books. I'll be signing copies of John and Mary Margaret in a couple of weeks
yeah.
on my book tour there. The community there is great too. And so we'll see. I'm working on it.
Well, you just kind of gave me a hint because I was going to ask you this, and you've talked about the event at Lemuria, and you're going to be down there. Now that obviously you've probably been vaccinated, I've been vaccinated, we can now get out, and the world is starting to open back up. I take it you've got a book tour set up for John and Mary Margaret.
Yeah, I'm real excited about it. And it's interesting because the larger cities are opening up slower.
Yeah.
So my launch here in Memphis at Novel Memphis is going to be virtual.
Oh,
I'm sad that it can't be in person, but they're just not doing it in person yet.
yeah.
And that's June the 4th. So that's coming up in 2 weeks. The good thing about that virtual is that I'm going to be in conversation with Jeffrey Blunt, who lives in Washington, D.C. Jeffrey was an early reader for John and Mary Margaret and wrote a blurb. And, plus he was an NBC News director for years. He was the first Black director at NBC News. And he's just a wonderful guy, and we've become friends. So if I was in person at Novel, it's
Yeah.
unlikely that he would be coming down from Washington, D.C. to be in conversation with me. So there's a plus. So that's virtual. But then 2 days later, I leave on a in-person book tour that I'm real excited about. And I'll go east to South Carolina. I'm working with a publicist, Kathy Bennett, who lives in South Carolina. So I have 5 events around, one at the Pat Conroy Literary Center in Beaufort, the Sumter Museum in Sumter, Pawleys Island. They do the movable, Litchfield Books does the movable feast, some things along in there. And then I'll head down to Fernandina Beach where Amelia Island is. There's a great bookstore there called the Book Loft. Then I'll go across the Panhandle and to Seaside, Florida at Sundog Books, to Fairhope, Alabama, to Page and Palette Books,
That's a great book.
the Gulf Coast, Past Christian, and Past Books and Past Christian, Mississippi, and then back up through the middle of Mississippi. And once again, Lemuria is still not doing in person.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can't do in person there. But while I'm coming home through there, I am meeting with a book club in Jackson one night. And so that'll be a lot of fun. So I'll be gone 2 weeks, and I can't wait to be out there again.
I have to say, just from, of course, I've done a children's book, I've done a couple short story books, but I mean, mainly cartoon books. But
Right.
the thing I've enjoyed, I think, about any book publishing that I've ever done is getting to go to do the book signings and doing book talks and getting to meet people. And I mean, that's the best part. And I'm so glad to hear that you're able to actually go out there and do in person and get to have that experience. And it sounds like you actually get a lot of great ideas and feedback from your readers.
Yeah, I do. I'm really thankful for that. That started with the blog, getting feedback. That's part of why I started a blog, was to get some feedback. But yes, from my readers, whether they be people I meet in person or online. You know, like I said, I'm real active on social media, and there's some great Facebook reading groups.
Mhm.
So I do author events with the Facebook groups too, and you get a lot of feedback that way. Instagram, the Bookstagrammers,
Mhm.
Uplit Books just started a campaign for my book last week. So there will be about 60 Bookstagrammers who will be reviewing it on Instagram.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's
So, you know, those are some great ways, but there's nothing like in person. You know, I'm so happy that the Mississippi Book Festival is going to be in person again. The Southern Festival of Books in Nashville has just decided they're going to be in person. They're going to cut it one day shorter and have
yeah.
it 2 days instead. Louisiana Book Festival is in person. So those, I love book
Oh,
festivals.
the Mississippi Book Festival is fantastic.
It is. It's
It's
great.
great. You know, you sounds like you totally enjoy the marketing aspect of the books too, and it sounds like you're really good at it as well. And my cousin's an author, and he looked at me one day and he said, "Go walk into Books a Zillion or whatever," and he said, "See all those books around there?" He said, "They don't sell books. You sell books."
That's right.
And it sounds like you've created a community around your books and around your characters on that. And I, like I said, I'm impressed with some reading the blurbs and reading the people that are giving John and Mary Margaret the thumbs up like they are. I think that I predict it's going to do really well for you. And it's a great book. Like I said, I really enjoyed reading it. It
Thank
was
you so
it was a
much.
quick read too. I was, you know, I sat down over the weekend and just sat down in my chair and kind of enjoyed it. And it was
Yeah.
fun. And
It's
um,
really short. I was worried that it was going to be too short, but I just I felt like it was done when
yeah,
it was done. In fact, I told my publisher with Color Books in Virginia because they had published Friends of the Library, and I said, "What if I turn John and Mary Margaret into a novella?"
yeah.
Like, nah, novellas, not sure about novellas. You know, try to hit 50,000 words, make a short novel. And but it just felt done. I felt like I would have just been padding it for the sake of
Yeah.
getting more words into it, you know.
Oh, if it had been 300 pages, I don't think it would have been this. I mean, I think it was perfect. It just
Thank you.
it
Thank
ended
you.
at a good speed. Well, I guess we're winding down on our time here. Are there any other thoughts that I obviously have probably missed a bunch of thoughts because
Well, yeah, there is one. You know, I did not get my MFA in writing. And then later in my 60s, I discovered a wonderful thing at Ole Miss called the Yoknapatawpha Summer Writers
oh
Workshop. It's been
yeah,
going on for about 20 years. I went 7 summers in a row. This
wow,
it's a long weekend, a 3-day event, and
yeah,
it's led by MFA people in the MFA program, and they only let about 15 students in, and you send in a 20-page excerpt from your manuscript, and you critique each other's, and the leader helps you critique it. So you learn how workshopping happens.
yeah,
For somebody who didn't get their MFA, it was like a mini MFA
yeah.
over 7 summers, you know. And so several chapters of different ones of my books got critiqued during those workshops. I highly recommend workshops for people that, especially if they didn't get an MFA program, because it's I don't mean it's a shortcut, but you know, I wasn't going to go back to school for that in my 60s. I could have, but I was actually encouraged not to by a couple of the people in the program there at Ole Miss. They said, just keep going to workshops, join, oh, this was another thing, join a critique group.
Yeah.
I was in one for a lot of years that met every month and critiqued each other's work, because other people that are writing are the best people in the world, you know, to give you feedback on your work. So I highly recommend workshops, and especially the Yoknapatawpha, which is still going. It's now called the Yok Shop, YOKSHOP, the Yok Shop. And Mo Walsh, Neil Walsh runs it. He's was in the program there, and now he's in New Orleans, but he comes over and runs it every May or June at Ole Miss. I think it's at the Powerhouse. Oh, it's at the Alumni House. So anyway, I would recommend.
Yeah, between doing the essays and between doing the workshops, it sounds like you've really developed quite a Rolodex of friends who write and being able to, and it is nice to be able to bounce ideas off of people and talk, you know, oh, I've got writer's block today. What do I need? You know, just kind of talk your way through it.
Right.
You know, I used to belong to an editorial cartoonist group, you know, now there's none of us left, but you know, we'd sit there, nobody else understands what you're going through unless it's somebody who's going through what you're going through on that. And I think that's fascinating about the workshops on that. Let let me ask you a little bit more about the creativity on that at the end here. Do you get writer's block, and how do you work your way through it?
I don't get writer's block once I've started a project.
Okay.
The hardest thing is getting started, is
Yeah.
getting that first part of it down. Years ago, I met Jocelyn Jackson, who's a wonderful author that I admire a lot. And she was a keynote speaker and led a breakout session at the first ever Mississippi Writers Guild Conference, which was down in Clinton, Mississippi, a number of years ago. And she said the way she writes her novels, and they're all New York Times bestsellers, is she has to get the first line down perfect or she can't move forward.
Beautiful.
So I went back and read the first line of all of her novels, and they were incredible first lines. Like you had to read the book once you read that first line, you know. So that made me, like, put a little trip on me to think, oh, I've got to get the first line, or at least the first paragraph. It's got to be this terrific hook. And I'm also, I can't stand to leave a mess on the page. Like many people will say to write a crappy first draft or whatever, you know, and then go back and clean it up later. Just get something down there and go back and clean. I have to edit it as I go. I can't leave it messy. That's just my writing style. I just can't do it. I can't go to bed with it. It's like leaving dirty dishes in the sink, you know, or something. So for me, like, that's why this next book hasn't gone very far yet. I don't think I'm quite in love with my opening sentence and my opening paragraph. So that's the only kind of writer's block. But I'm so busy with marketing for John and Mary Margaret right now that I'll probably wait until July, when a lot of my physical book tour is over, and I'll come back and I'll put on the other cap, you know, put on the creative side and get the marketing side to try to quiet down for a little bit.
Well, I mean, I'll be really honest with you. By the time you get back, Susan, you're going to have experienced so much and met so many different people, and you're probably going to come in with a whole treasure chest full of ideas just from that. You're going to let your well recharge. I mean, it's going to be a whole. So, I mean, I'm kind of excited to see where this next book goes.
Thank you. Me too. And, you know, and the fact that I am signing books at Sundog Books in Seaside, Florida, I'm definitely going to spend the day there imagining my book being set there.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to kind of soak that up. And again.
I might try to spend 2 days there if you could. I mean, that sounds like now, sometimes when you're on the book tour and you go to a really nice place, it's like, oh, I think I may stick around a little bit. So,
except that it's hot in the summer. I love to go down there in the spring and fall. No, that's my favorite time in fact, my husband and I usually go there for Thanksgiving because our kids are spread out. They're in Denver, Arizona, and New Orleans. So, you know, they're not home for Thanksgiving. You know.
By the way, doing the old Google search, an image of your family came up, and you have a beautiful family. I was just going to pass.
Oh, of course. That's another thing about writing John and Mary Margaret. I have a Black son-in-law and mixed race granddaughters. And I dedicated the book to those granddaughters, to Grace and Anna and Gabby and Izzy. Hoping that the world would be kinder to them, you know. So I don't know why I didn't think about that, mentioning earlier that that was another influence for writing the book. You know.
Excellent. Well, Susan, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. And like I said, the book is wonderful. I guess it's available any place you want to buy a book. It's probably there.
Absolutely.
But
go independent bookstores, but it's also available online. So wherever you want to get it, it can be pre-ordered right now. And for those in Jackson, please pre-order it from Lemuria bookstore there. That would be great.
And once again, the interview you're going to have with Ralph Eubanks is on what day again?
July 1st.
July 1st.
Yes, at Lemuria. That's right. It's kind of the end of my physical book tour. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marshall. I enjoyed it a whole lot.
Yeah, I look forward to keeping up, and you know, I can't wait to see what else you come up with in the future. I'm going to dig back into some of your older books too.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right, take care. Thank you again.